Good morning, delegates. Welcome to this morning's session. Maybe I'll be a little bit slow because everybody's probably still eating breakfast, but so this session is Culture, Climate, and Eco-Transitions. I'm Sabrina Decker. You are either blessed or cursed with me for the next 2 hours, but hopefully I know our speakers are fabulous and we will have a great conversation. Before we begin, there's just a short video to recap yesterday's events.
Having culture as a stand-alone goal in the post-2030 agenda is essential, because only if culture is a goal are we going to have specific targets and specific individual goals that we're going to measure its progress. We really have to recognize that sustainable development has a cultural dimension. So for this reason, culture cannot, and cultural rights cannot be detached from sustainable development.
We need to take care of diversity. We need to acknowledge that inequalities that exists. And the only way to do that is through dialogue and democracy take time.
For us, culture is the main dish of our menu in our country. You can't really promote tourism if you separate it to the culture. We don't only promote our beaches, but we include culture as one of the main products in our package.
As Lord Mayor of Dublin, I'm committed to supporting and promoting our city's rich cultural heritage. We add our voice in solidarity to the global campaign for a culture goal. And our actions today in preserving and promoting our culture will determine the Dublin of tomorrow. Isátí Mália Clia Lán le culture. Tásúla gum galéir go muine sibh tantna bhas gachrod atá romh sa céad cúpla lá eile. Gur a míle maithagí.
Thank you. Our first speaker is Mr. Hee-yeon Kim, Vice Governor of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province.
네, 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Hee-yeon, the Vice Governor for Political Affairs of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province, Republic of Korea. It is my honor to attend and deliver a keynote speech at the 2023 UCLG Culture Summit held in Dublin, the capital of Ireland, a city of literature and art. The world's leading cities are responding to the climate crisis and working to create a sustainable future. In particular, we share the value and importance of how we should move forward through culture and art. Today, I would like to explain the Global Youth Creative Residency Project that Jeju, a leading cultural city of UCLG, is promoting to respond to the climate crisis. Jeju has been promoting culture policies based on Culture 21 approved at the first World Culture Summit, focusing on improving the culture competency of individuals and groups and covering everything from culture and environment to technology and industry for sustainability. We have made connections based on diversity, coexistence, participation, and accessibility, and have supported various exchange activities for cultural development. Although it may seem complicated and difficult, culture is a word that has a tremendous power to help us understand each other. Until now, many cities have held various local cultural festivals based on the power of the region's unique culture and implemented policies to link them with tourism. However, we realize that a new or unconventional cultural policy is needed for sustainable development amid the climate crisis. Jeju was the first city in Asia to be selected as a UCLG Cultural Leading City, and as the chair city of the UCLG ASPEC Culture Subcommittee, we sought to promote cultural policies that resonate with the world. For the coming future and the next generation, we thought about what projects we could do in relation to climate change, especially from a cultural perspective. We wanted to expand the cultural capabilities of individuals into society, contribute to the growth of local culture, and create an atmosphere throughout society along with the awareness of local residents. So Jeju focused on building the capabilities of people who are connected to culture. And among these, we decided to focus more on strengthening the capabilities of young artists who will lead the future generation. In May 2017, at the second World Culture Summit held in Jeju, Jeju Island UCLG Jeju Free International City Development Center signed a business agreement for long-term cooperation and strengthening the global capabilities of young artists, the future generation. With this as an opportunity, the Global Youth Culture Forum, which started in Jeju in 2018, is currently being held every year under the project name Global Youth Creative Residency. This project is designed to focus on the sustainability pursued by UCLG and deliver new messages and awareness of climate change through a global network of young people so that creative works and policies can be proposed. In order to continuously encourage the creative activities of young artists, each event was operated in a variety of ways, sometimes in a forum format or as an immersive residency. This year, we focused more on strengthening expertise and forming international human networks in an offline format in the post-corona era. Last September, 24 young artists from 8 countries participated in the 5th Global Youth Creative Residency held in Jeju. We moved away from the ocean-related topics that had been mainly covered so far and turned our attention to the environment of the inland of the island. Under the theme of Down Roots, Growing Island, they had an opportunity to experience Jeju's gochiwals, which refers to unmanned and unapproachable forest mixed with trees and bushes, understand the ecology of trees, and reevaluate Jeju's environment. They also experienced in the field how environmental changes in Jeju due to climate change are affecting the region. During the residency period, young artists met in various ways with 38 professional artists who are active in Jeju and around the world. They discussed ways to convey a sustainable message by linking each field of culture and arts, as well as ways to expand its influence. By the end of the program, they were able to recognize the impact of artistic creation on their society and resident behavior, and pledged to make efforts to export to positive influence on the response to the climate crisis. Now, let's take a moment to watch a 90-second video of the Global Youth Creative Residency Program promoted by Jeju this year. I hope that the video I just showed you was helpful in understanding our project. These projects don't pay off right away, and I don't expect results right away. This is a process. We are providing an opportunity to create broader and deeper awareness of the need for linking sustainability and culture for the coming future. I'm confident that young artists who participate in the Global Youth Creative Residency and understand the connection between sustainability and culture will gradually achieve personal growth and as a result contribute to the culture development of each region. I also hope that it will lead not only to individual growth in culture and artistic aspects, but also to growth that can contribute to overcoming common problems of humanity, such as the climate crisis. And I expect that growth will extend to regions, cities, and the world. Based on its experience so far, Jeju wants to make another new change and take the next step by expanding the scope of participants in other projects that have been promoted mainly in the Asia-Pacific region to the entire world. Cities around the world, including the Asia-Pacific region, will be able to focus cultural resources in each city that are deeply concerned about the climate crisis and sustainability. Jeju will continue to prepare for more advanced projects and await the participation of UCLG member cities. I invite you to participate in Jeju's projects for a sustainable future, and I look forward to sharing the process and results with you. We are always ready to welcome you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Excellent. I was going to ask for the clicker. We've got it back. So I have been given the opportunity to talk shortly about what Dublin City Council is doing, and now I'm going to rifle through my notes here, about Dublin City Council's Climate Action Plan. We've just completed the public consultation for the draft of the second plan, Climate Neutral Dublin, which sets out how we as a city are going to do our bit to meet Ireland's national climate objective of a 51% reduction in emissions while striving for climate neutrality by 2030, as we are an EU mission city along with Cork City. It also sets out how we are going to become a climate resilient city prepared for the known and unknown impacts of climate change, all the while not causing harm and ensuring that the transition is just. A seemingly impossible feat, especially if you focus on the Excel spreadsheet and try to keep emissions in neat little boxes, which they really don't like doing. Farmers need roads to bring food to the businesses that occupy buildings, which use energy transmitted and distributed by utilities under the roads to cook the food that feeds you and I. This is one of the reasons that we took to heart the word guidance in the guidance documents and moved away from the recommended siloed themes towards a systems approach. The actions in our new plan are based on 4 foundations: a resilient city, a resourceful city, a creative city, and a social city. The actions are holistic, and their implementation requires interdisciplinary teams, which leads me to my second reason for this shift. In implementing our first plan, we learned that it isn't enough to say we're going to reduce emissions by retrofitting our buildings and converting our vehicle fleet to EVs, and hope that people will do the same. Life is complex. People have other priorities. But if everyone needs to do their bit, how do we make climate action tangible and a normal part of your day? Fortunately, everyone needs to eat, and I hope you had all enjoyed your breakfast. And thankfully in Ireland, we have Creative Ireland, who provided us with a small amount of funding to explore a conversation around food and climate change. Eat the Streets initially brought together a food writer and researcher, Michelle Darmody, a graphic designer, Niall Sweeney, a web designer, Conor Cahill, and 4 chefs, Connor Spacey of Chef's Manifesto, Dan Keane of Urban Brewing, Katie Quinn of Lilliput Stores, and Owen Meldon from Little Bird, to figure out a way in the middle of a pandemic to tell the story of Irish food, its history, and its future in the context of climate change. After several promises of freedom from the world's longest lockdown, we managed to manage our shared expectations and agreed to host an online festival that included cook-alongs, after-dinner chats, and self-guided activities provided by historians and educators that are still on the website, which is www.eatthestreets.ie, and I would encourage you to look at it, especially if you're staying for a few days. There's some good activities, with the objective to encourage people to grow, cook, create, and discover together with us. So since that initial thing in 2021, Eat the Streets has grown. This past September, we hosted our third festival, second in person, in Richmond Barracks with the Dublin City Culture Company, who is hosting you for this event, and has brought together people of all ages, ethnicities, and gender, who are growers, producers, creators, as well as food lovers. Eat the Streets has allowed us to produce a food strategy as well for the city, Edible Dublin, which is also an action in our new climate action plan under resilience, but it also cuts across a resourceful city, a creative city, and a social city. Most importantly, Eat the Streets has clearly demonstrated the importance of culture as a force for shared action. If by now it isn't obvious from the lack of an Irish accent, I was clearly not born here. I was born in Canada to immigrant parents. I'm biracial, and growing up, I struggled with accepting my Chinese heritage. I was the only biracial person in my Saturday morning Chinese school, and I was reminded of it. School was no different until bubble tea became a thing. Fortunately, though, my mom was and still is an expert in food diplomacy. While it broke her heart to let me quit Chinese school, she understood. She instead used food to nurture an appreciation for our heritage, customs, and values. Like many families, we have a family recipes, but ours was non-traditionally passed down from mother-in-law to daughter-in-law. The shared experience of baking Arnhem Meishes together created a bond and respect for each other despite difference. It was also probably provided an opportunity to commiserate and bond over the Canadianness of my brother and I. So where is the link to Dublin City Council's Climate Action Plan? Culture is vital to realizing a climate future that is just. Culture helps us understand why we value what we value, how we think. It allows us to understand difference and does not allow us to reduce difference to appearance. Culture can explain and make sense of what numbers cannot. This is why we have an important piece to take today for this conference to talk about how culture can do this. So now I would like it to hand over to our speakers, and just to gently remind them, I've been instructed to keep time, which I'm not good at, but we'll do our best. So our first speaker is Catalina Valencia, Secretary for Culture of Bogota.
Muy buenos días para todos.
Good morning to you all. For me, it's a pleasure. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm thanking the UCLG Angeli Pascual for inviting us from Bogota. As a Secretary for Culture, it's the first time I'm taking part in the summit, and the last one as well, because we are finishing on the remit of the mayoress in Bogota. Is the first woman that is a mayoress in Colombia, the mayoress of the most important and largest city in Colombia. I would like to tell you that in the last 4 years, in our team for culture in Bogota, we set up as a goal. We wanted to stop being marginal. We didn't want to be marginal. We didn't want to be behind the other agendas, government, economic development, gender governance. And it was a huge challenge. We didn't want to be the last ones. We wanted to become an important and transversal segment. And we set ourselves a goal, which is we have to have the citizen and the creation in the center of our policies, not only cultural, but also social, environmental, economic, and gender policies. And in this sense, we thought that we cannot be marginal, we cannot be the last ones. And this is a conversation that has to do with environment and sustainability. Bogota is maybe one of the Latin American cities that has the highest number of cycling lane and cycling roads, which is contributing towards the sustainable mobility. A few days ago, we could do the bicycle was declared as a sustainable means of transportation in Bogota. This is great news because for the last 20 years we have been traditionally having a cycling lane on a Sunday, but we wanted to promote more sustainable mobility. In the last few years, we have been working on 4 essential axes, essential for energy transition, for sustainable mobility, and as well to work from culture towards sustainability. We have led processes in order to transform the infrastructure and equipment in order to have infrastructure that's migrating towards more energy efficiency. Now we have a planetarium that's using the rain water in their toilets. We have something that is the projecting device, the projector of the images in the planetarium has been changed to be more energy efficient. We have a footprint carbon calculator device for all the events and shows. And there are 2 things as well. Conscious or aware economy, trying to make the most of the waste that comes from shows and events, trying to use reusable materials and trying to decrease energy in all the shows. We are trying as well to have a segregated waste. And recently, we started a campaign called Don't Go Back, which invites all the citizens to fashion, to have a more sustainable fashion. So the idea that waste is not waste, it's not rubbish. Everything, all materials, all fabrics can be recycled. They can become outfits and pieces of clothing. This campaign has been going on for the whole year, and it has been a whole success. Very soon we have a pastoral showcasing all the things that have been designed by local artists. They have been designing from eggshells and cigarette butts. They have been designing outfits and pieces of clothing, try to highlight the need to recycle. We have been doing some training activities which try to show how to manage waste and rubbish. This is something that is changing in the cities, and it means a challenge. We organize 4 international fora, Breathe Air Art, trying to talk about challenges that art and culture are facing, not only as events or shows, but as well as social transformation processes concerning environmental behavior. We have another strategy, more music, less plastic in a music festival. In the last 2 years, we had the most crowded festivals in the history of Bogota, more than 300,000 people attending festivals. These festivals have been held for the last 30 years in Bogota with all kinds of music genders. And in this year, we managed to have less plastic and more citizens' involvement. For the first time in our history in Bogota, we had the first carbon-neutral park in Latin America, and we did that together. Environment, culture, and leisure and sports departments working together to achieve that goal. Now I would like to make an appeal, a special appeal, which is the following. Clearly, in this culture summits, all the secretaries for culture are here, all those that are in charge of governance in the field of culture, but this conversation is still very endogamic. And this is the case because those that should be here are those people that are in the government, economic development, environment, all the responsible for this department, because it's always among ourselves. The awareness that we need a real transformation and that culture is not only an event, but is a process for conversation and transformation in our societies in our Latin America, in our different continents, all this has to do with having a conversation that goes beyond cultural managers, and we have all those that are kind of taking the decisions in environment, economic development, and social development are taking part in this conversation. So this is what we are trying to do in Bogota. We don't want to be the last ones in the political agenda or social or economic development agendas, because we are, in fact, the ones that can achieve this kind of change in awareness. Culture is not an event, it's a personal, individual, and collective transformation. If we want to have real impact in cultural change, we need to have a wider conversation with more people. Thank you very much.
Hear me? Is it working? Perfect. So hello, everybody. My name is Ainara Fernandez, and I'm part of UCLG, so United Cities and Local Governments, but I'm not a part of the Culture Committee of United Cities and Local Governments. I am a part of the research department of United Cities and Local Governments. And I have 3 main ideas that I want to share with you, and a question. The first idea that I want to share with you is that in order to be fair, I would like to say that for us, working on governance, and particularly working on research around governance, if we were to ask the same question that we asked you yesterday, in terms of, is your work more related to people, planet, or government? If we were to ask that question in the other way, we would find out that perhaps culture would be the planet when it comes to us researching on issues around urban governance. And this is particularly true and particularly grave with respect to one initiative that I am a part of, as part of the UCLG research team, and together with the LSE cities and Metropolis, which is the metropolitan section of UCLG. And it's an initiative that's called the Emergency Governance Initiative. It's an initiative in which we're trying to understand what it means to govern complex emergencies from a local level. And I promise that we started this initiative before the outbreak of COVID-19. But of course, after the outbreak of COVID-19, we did focus a lot on what governing this sanitary emergency meant for local and regional governments. And in particular, we're trying to understand complex emergencies. And what are complex emergencies? So from our point of view, complex emergencies, they have the capacity to erode the cultural, the civic, the political, and the economic stability of our societies. Moreover, they go beyond social memory. So we cannot go back in time and try to understand how we did it back then to solve a similar crisis, because it's the first time that we're facing emergencies of this sort. And this takes me to the second idea that I wanted to share with you. And it is that in this initiative that we have been undertaking for the past 3 years, we have found out that when responding to complex emergencies from the local level, culture is deprioritized. And in fact, between 2020 and 2021, we ran a survey between 33 municipalities from across the globe. And we found out that when it came to prioritizing investments at the local level, in over 20 of these municipalities, it was culture and sports, the sector where fundings had been taken away from in order to finance other policy priorities related to sanitary emergency, to the purchase of protective equipment, etc. And this is critical, because we also saw during the pandemic that, in fact, culture played a central role in the governance of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think that also it is right there in front of us, for all of us to see that it plays a central role in terms of the governance of the climate emergency. And it plays a central role both in terms of what it means for a local or regional government to govern these emergencies, but it also plays a central role in terms of us, citizens, for us to comply with the rules and procedures, for us to trust our institutions, our governing institutions. And this takes me to the third idea that I want to share with you, which is that as part of this initiative, we're about to enter into a next stage in which what we're going to be focusing on is exactly the question of, do we need a culture change in order to be able to govern complex emergencies from a local perspective? We believe that the answer to this question is yes. But this is my final question for all of you. What does this cultural change exactly mean? Are we talking about a change in the values that need to guide the way in which we govern complex emergencies? Again, this is not something that a local government has been trained to do. These are major challenges that are challenging human existence and the existence of other species on the Earth. What does this culture shift exactly mean? This is a question that is not an open-ended question that I want to throw out there into the air. I think it's a question that we need to be posing to you, to people working in the cultural sector, to people working within local and regional governments, within partner institutions around issues of culture. Because it's a question that's multifaceted, it's a question that is a complex question, and also, very importantly, it's a question that means different things to different territories and different people. And we cannot even fathom to think that it's a question that's going to be able to be responded with one simple answer. So I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to stop with a question. I'm going to be that cheeky person, but it's a question that I would love to pick up and to debate about with all of you here. Thanks a lot.
We will pick up that question when we get to the Q&A. Our final speaker on this panel is Selina Kale. We okay?
Sorry for the delay. Oops. Oh no. Okay, can I? Oh, no. It's caught up in my hair. Okay. I hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. As I already said, my name is Selina Kale. I'm from Berlin, Germany, and I'm deputy chair of the 2N2K network, which is a sustainable network for the arts and culture. And yeah, when I got the question for this panel, I thought it was a really, really broad and big question. How can culture and cultural actors become one of the drivers to tackle climate change? So actually, looking historically, artistic expression and cultural narratives have historically played a really critical role in forming and shaping societal values. And as my speakers already mentioned, it's very much a vital role. But before we really start to go into what culture actually can do, I wanted to share a little bit of my opinion of also the German cultural policies, because at the moment in Germany we have no climate protection goals for the cultural sector. So if any of you have your national climate protection policies for your country in terms of culture, I would really much like to exchange on that later on. We have emerging frameworks and conditions in cultural policy, but as I said, there's nothing very permanent. And to give someone who starts out as a city or so a kind of clear roadmap of how and where to act. So also, we don't have any, or the cultural sector is not a major emittent of emissions. Julie Spicer-Co did a survey and found out that only 0.000% of the gross total emissions emitted in 2021 in the UK are due to the cultural sector. But everyone needs to contribute, and we also heard this before yesterday and also today. So how can we do this? At 2N2K and also with my colleague Dr. Ralph Weiss, we came up with a triple climate responsibility model for the cultural sector, which is looking at the operational, the discursive, and the strategic kind of responsibility on climate change for the cultural sector. So in terms of operational, we also heard really nice things like using rainwater. So climate protection in terms of looking at your operating system, avoiding and reducing negative impact you have in your cultural organization and as a cultural actor. The discursive way, that's Jeju is a very great example, the festival and as well as youth interaction, climate protection through culture. So cultural mission, utilizing positive contribution of the cultural sector, artistic expression, whether it's visual, whether it's musical and performative. So use this unique ability to evoke emotions and inspire and act. And the third one is the strategic goal, trying to get and secure also culture. We just heard that there's a lack of funding, there's lack of people working in culture, and there's things that are taken away, money taken away and repurposed to other things. So therefore, back in 2022, in September, we published the Sustainability Declaration for the Cultural Sector in Germany. It's also available as an international version, and focused on 5 main SDGs in that declaration, whereas we think that obviously every culture plays a main role in all of the 17 goals, and as we heard, there might be another SDG in terms of culture, so I'm very much looking forward to how this is going to develop. But we see that SDG 11, so sustainable cities and communities, have one of the major impacts. We say that they are a discursive and critical and creative and reflective actor in this term, and that we therefore must use the impact of society and use the strategic aspect of a city to help with funding, spaces, and opportunities. The next one is high quality education, so SDG 4, where we say that we need to provide cultural education and education for sustainable development is key in imparting values, competencies, and enabling people to think foresighted and act sustainably. The next one, and we also heard it about consumption and sustainable production, so using circular economy, as we think that also using social and labor standards and trying to impart this with your employees, with taking everyone on board, leave no one behind, is really a crucial thing. We can see that, especially in the culture, mobility and energy is playing a critical role when planning and trying to get down to net zero or becoming carbon neutral. And I think this summit is really important and that we network together. So SDG 17 partnerships brings it all together. So really having this cross-sectional, this international exchange. And I think already saw with my panelists this morning that there are so many things we can learn from each other, that we don't look into silos and stay in our bubbles and in our countries, that we really look over our borders and try to connect and also learn from our mistakes. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward what the UN and also COP28 brings for culture. Thank you very much.
Just looking to make sure. I think we have time for a few questions, and I will hand it over to the audience. Are there questions? There's a gentleman roving with mics in the back, so if you could just raise your hand. It's a very quiet audience this morning. Did we have enough coffee? Okay, I think it was good coffee. I was quite surprised. Did we all have good coffee? Maybe I'll try to kick it off with a question, and it's just the one that's popped into my head. We all come from very different countries with very different cultures. What would you think is the cultural lesson that your respective cultures can teach? I don't know if anybody wants to answer in the audience. That's also equally feasible. And I feel like I'm going to do the teacher thing where I'm looking and I'm trying to see who's going to give me eye contact, and I'll pick on that first person. Mr. Kim. So what can Korean culture teach the world about climate action and sustainability? What's maybe something you grew up with that your parents taught you? Maybe that's a better way of putting it. What's something each of our parents have taught us about our own culture that we can share? I think my parents, I didn't mention my father, but he was an advocate of no food waste and had the patience of an incredible man to sit there and wait for me for 2 hours to finish everything on my plate. So I don't waste food anymore.
예.
Culture is, in relation to culture, to climate crisis. When I was young, we keep everything. We didn't throw away anything. But nowadays, the world changes, and we talk about carbon neutralization, renewable energy, solar panels. In order for us to preserve the beautiful nature of Jeju, we have an island called Udo near Jeju, and tourists come to Udo, and tourists actually pick up trash and also plastic bottles there, and that way they participate in preserving the beautiful environment of Jeju and Udo. Especially, they have an enthusiasm to preserve the beautiful nature of Jeju by participating, for example, as I mentioned before, picking up trashes and go back to the mainland.
I love that. That is, it's excellent. It's you get to exchange and you get to respect another culture and appreciate the value there. And I think that's excellent. I think more countries should do that. We'll make other people answer questions. Selena?
I think I'm not really representing Germany in such, but we are always prone to be like court efficient and trying to make models. Maybe you saw that with trying to do a declaration and putting a model to it and trying to find answers and ways how to actually help people find a fundament also, because I see the entry into tackling this massive climate change problem, and yeah, it's massive, and I think we try in Germany to find ways and models and make it like accessible in terms of taking step by steps and building frameworks. So I really like that about it, but I'm also half English, so I'm also dual national, and I think the creative part of me is more English actually. So I think I learn a lot about that when I think about my English heritage, and also kind of seeing new ways and creating more spaces and being more open, because when you must know it yourself, when you kind of have parents from two different countries, you always have to be a bit more of a cosmopolitan, or have a more cosmopolitan way of looking at things. So I think it can really help, because kind of breaking these borders and trying to get out of our bubble. Yeah.
I love that, because yeah, you do start finding, you start going, oh no, that's the Dutch side, that's the Canadian, and that's very much the Chinese side. Catalina or Ainara?
I was thinking about, I really was hearing everybody about this in this conversation, and I was asking myself if the development is sustainable. This is a big question, because in this moment, what we are doing to develop is not sustainable. So when we talk about culture and really ask questions about how culture could contribute to change, it's different what we do for the infrastructure and the spectacle, massive spectacles to change our practices. But the main thing, I think, is how we change our minds to transform our habits, our quotidian think. Sorry, my English is a little bit.
You're doing great.
So this is the reflection. I think the culture has a lot of work every day, and I think we have the vision, we still have the vision today, until today, that the culture are events, not process, not about transformations, not about a spiritual transformation. So this is my reflection, my question, and I don't know how to change the vision about the do things quotidianly to change, because it's not sustainable. And I was asking about the goal. With Jordi, sometimes we talk about this thing, and I was thinking, we know that it's important that the culture has a goal, but the culture is every goals in this agenda. So I don't know if I'm clear, but I'm just trying to make some reflections about how culture can do the change, but it's not sustainable. I think the development is not sustainable. This is the new question that we must do about what is happening.
So just kind of trying to capture that, like, culture, and your point of events. It's like we have these big events like Glastonbury, and everybody has these festivals that people go to, but is it becoming too big that you lose sight of cultural values? So in your example of Jeju, people come and respect the culture and are there, and I think there's a flip side of that. I will admit I've traveled a lot, and there's that risk of voluntourism and all those pieces, but how do we keep culture's unique identity and stories and values to us in that big global of working together, but how does it become how do we use that sharing nature of it to slow development maybe, and to think upon development and what it actually means? Is that perhaps?
And maybe ask us if it's important to develop, or how to develop.
What do we value? What do we appreciate? I think somebody in Eat the Streets put it brilliantly to us is, what do you need to live a good life? And I think that's, yes. So what do we need to live a good life? But perhaps, I know you're shaking your head, I feel like you have an answer.
I wish I had an answer. But in fact, thanks a lot for your question, because I think it's a very beautiful question. It's a very powerful question because it touches human emotion. And I think that one of the key aspects of getting together for a cultural summit is that we're understanding the importance and the value, the transformational power of human emotion. And actually, the anecdote or the lesson that I was going to share from my own culture, it goes very much in line with what Catalina was saying. I come from Spain, but I come from southern Spain, and I come from a desert. And it was very, very difficult to harvest food in the desert that I come from, particularly in the 60s, the 70s, and even somewhere earlier than that. And my mom, she would always tell me that they were happy. They didn't need much. It was very difficult to get oranges. And she would tell me how for Christmas they would pull the resources together and they would get oranges, and that would make them really happy. And I was thinking that maybe there's a lesson there. Maybe there's a lesson about maybe we don't need accumulation to be happy. Maybe rethinking development has to do with rethinking this notion that happiness comes hand in hand with accumulation, with excessive growth for the sake of growth. Yeah. So that's the cultural emotion that I wanted to share with you. But then, listening to your reflection as well, I was thinking that I think that there is, I may be going too far with this, but I think that to a point, we are witnessing the emergence of a global culture of people being aware of the necessity to stop climate change. I mean, I think that this is something that a lot of you will share with me, but I feel tremendously guilty when I buy myself cookies and they come in plastic. Just look, I walk into every building and I look at the amount of plastic that I can see over there. I look at the lights, I think about the impacts of everything in terms of climate change. And I feel like this is increasingly something that is shared by more and more and more of humanity, because I feel like deep down we're animals and our instincts are telling us that this is bad, this is really bad. And I think that there may be something such as a global culture of being increasingly aware of our impacts of our lifestyles on climate change. And my question would then be, okay, so if this is really a global culture that's emerging, how can we translate what we feel, these fears that we feel, these concerns that we feel, in terms of concrete claims that we make to our governments, for concrete regulations, for concrete approaches? So there's a gap there for me that I think that maybe, you know, we can also take a lesson from this global culture of climate awareness that we may be witnessing as something that's emerging amongst all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Oh, we have an audience question.
Yeah.
Oh, we have 3. I don't know how we're going to do this because we have 2 minutes and 24 seconds. Does anybody know who had the hand up first? That's the way I'm going to do this. The lady here.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Sí, muchas gracias. Sí, muy interesante estos temas que se han sacado a colación. Ainara Fernández ha hablado de la investigación que se hace.
And the point you make is really quite important. When we are faced with global emergencies or even domestic emergencies in our own cities or regions, the first things to go are the budgets or the funding for culture and sport. You are absolutely correct. But at the same time, isn't that exactly what brings that coalition, that oneness for human behavior to become resilient in times of emergencies? So I'm quite excited that you're beginning to look at research around cultural issues and what that means. If you just take yourselves back to the pandemic, everybody was in their little box, but eventually what came out of it was groups of people culturally started dancing, and just that resilience to what we were facing as humankind, not just in different areas, but across the globe, brought us together to build a defense against what we were facing. So you make a very important point, but the governance and the regulations are never going to be the same for any one region, but certainly the similarity of a cultural response may not be the same, but it brings forth that huge sense of resilience. I just wanted to contribute that. Thank you.
So we have 35 seconds, and I'm just going to quickly look over to Tracy to see if I can just go slightly over. Can I? No. Okay. That was a very clear no on my side. So I would just...
Maybe can I just quickly say, I kind of I would say that there's a similarity, yes, but I also say that the first thing that was cut in the Corona pandemic was actually culture, and we have so many people that they not came back as musicians or so because they couldn't afford to be musicians, just on the verge of like connecting with each other and doing culture as such. I mean, this was the first thing that was cut, so I do apply and say that we really need the resources, because culture can't be just an on-top topic, as well as sustainability can't. So yeah, therefore, yeah.
I think that is a great way to end this panel. So please join your hands together and thank you, Mr. Kim, Catalina, Selena, and Arina. I knew I was going to get it wrong.
It's a difficult one.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you. Our next panel, and I'm trying to make sure I don't drop many things, I'd like to invite to the stage okay, got that. Dr. William McGarry. Excellent, thank you, perfect. That was great, creeping up behind me there. Dr. Małgorzata Chikla, hopefully I have pronounced that correctly. If not, please, she will be online joining us. Hopefully the technology works for us. Robalisa Halep, online as well. Sorry, you're just going to be stuck on stage all on your own here. Sorry. Ted Oakes, Policy Coordinator for Europa Nostra. Thank you. Wakir Ahmed. Excellent, thank you. All right, so we have more time for questions because I cut everybody off. I won't say any few words about what else we're doing in Dublin City Council, but just to say that creative culture is important to us, and we're very excited to start a project through Creative Ireland that we'll be engaging a biodiversity artist in residence to help us embed culture around biodiversity in our organization. So the first speaker I would like to invite to this stage is Dr. McGarry. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Let me just start by thanking the inviters, the organisers of today's event, and especially Jordi Pascal, for inviting me to come and speak here today. My name is Will McGarry. I am the focal point for climate change at the International Council of Monuments and Sites, which is a professional organisation of over 11,000 people from all over the world. And we come from a wide range of cultural backgrounds. I'm sure we have many members in the room today. Our working group, which focuses specifically on climate action, has over 120 members from over 60 countries. And I think this gives us a really nice perspective into many of the themes of the value of heritage to climate action today. As you will tell from my accent, I am actually originally from Dublin, but no longer live in Dublin. I now live in Belfast, just up the road. And it's very special for me to actually be able to speak here today. Like many of us, perhaps we travel all over the world to speak and speak at different places. And for a conference looking at culture today and what is important to us, it's very nice as a Dubliner to be able to speak in a city that I have an emotional attachment to, a city that I care deeply for. My heritage, my history intersects with parts of this city. I was going to say it's familiar to me, but then this morning I went to the wrong conference centre. So maybe it's actually not, but I did make it here on time. So it's been wonderful hearing all about the positive contributions of culture this morning, because so often our dialogue is about loss, and so often our dialogue is about loss and damage. But at ICOMOS, we have long maintained that culture is a critical asset for climate action, and it's just for the reasons I talked about. Culture is important to people because it's about who we are. It's about where we come from. It's an anchor that links us in place. It puts a face on the climate crisis, both its loss and damage, but also our responses. In a recent workshop, a co-sponsored meeting we had between ourselves and ICOMOS, UNESCO, and the IPCC, our colleagues from climate science kept talking about how they were seeing a human face on climate change. And we truly believe that culture does this. It puts people back within the climate change discussion. And in fact, Anara talked about this earlier when she talked about that human connection, which I think is so important. In preparation just for speaking to you today, I flicked through the awesome UCLG Culture 21 report, and it opens with two questions. The first is, what futures do people want to transition to, but also whose resilience matters? And I think culture is critical in assessing both these questions because it allows us to imagine and manage different and better futures. Culture has been essential and central to all our transitions in the past. I'm an archaeologist, and from the agricultural revolution through to the industrial revolution, culture has been central to this transition, and we cannot eco-transition without culture. But it also allows us to do it in a fair and equitable way, understanding what matters to people. We often focus on iconic heritage assets at organizations like ICOMOS. But following on from the COVID pandemic, which we've heard so much about today, I firmly believe that for most people, culture is local. The challenge for us in the heritage sector is to engage locally with people and the culture that matters to them, and to bring them along in the important transitions we need to do. Often, again, we focus on culture as being something that's static, something that is in the past, something that is extant, but we do forget that a huge amount of our culture is intangible. It's dynamic, it changes, it evolves. And cities and urban areas are often hubs for different cultures, and will increasingly become hubs for different cultures where communities relocate due to climate and climate refugees. This makes engaging with these communities, embracing their culture, so important. And just to touch on something that Sabrina said, I'm actually married to a Canadian, and when she nationalised, when she became Irish, she received a letter from the minister that welcomed her to Ireland, encouraged her to embrace our culture, but also asked her to bring her culture with her and to share with us, to make us stronger together. I think maybe as a country we still have some way to go to do that, but I love the ambition of it. Finally then, eco-transition requires us to make different decisions, and culture can help mediate these by identifying synergies, but also navigating tricky trade-offs. We need to do this in an equitable way. Often when we see synergies, they benefit those who are already quite privileged, and when we see trade-offs, they can impact those without that privilege. This requires us to engage sometimes with questions of authenticity and integrity, which in the cultural heritage sector are so important. Maybe to rethink some of these concepts. We cannot save buildings at the expense of the people who live within them. So this requires us to acknowledge plural value systems, the need to embrace the dynamism of culture, the need to respect and to preserve what we can from the past, but also the need to accept that it will evolve going forward. And culture will help us in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. I hope she's introduced you to poutine and that you enjoy it. Our next speaker joining us online, if the technology allows, is Dr. Malgorzata Chikla.
Hello.
Thank you. We can hear you.
Hi. Thank you very much. My name is Malgorzata Chikla, and I'm here on behalf of ICLEI. Thank you very much for the invitation. From the perspective of ICLEI, the global network of local governments committed to sustainable development, there is no sustainable future for cities without culture. As a founding signatory of the call for action to include cultural heritage, the arts, and creative sectors in climate policy, we see and we feel that culture is at the heart of climate actions. The history of cities serves as a bridge connecting today's heritage with the documented changes, including the anthropogenic impact on the environment. Cities have responsibilities for the climate emergency and also a unique opportunity right now to think about the future. As hubs for creativity, cities can play a crucial role in combating global warming and driving sustainable solutions. Thus, culture and cultural heritage are essential in these ambitions. And if we imagine a city as a house, culture and heritage serve as its foundation, providing the necessary support and structure for sustainable development, fostering innovation, resilience, diversity, inclusivity, feeling of belonging and of being needed. If we imagine a city as a dialogue of various stakeholders, culture would be the language they speak and they understand. Exchange and cooperation fuel sustainable urban development, serving as a catalyst for sustainable solutions resulting from synergies. And finally, if we acknowledge our ability to imagine at all, we already identified the key tool needed for sustainable policies. The ability to think forward, design scenarios, and reflect on alternatives further enhance our capacity to create and implement sustainable solutions. The first point I would like to raise in relation to the topic of this panel, the culture, sustainability, and ecological transition, is the need for a systemic perspective and a focus on integrating culture into urban as well as rural sustainable development by recognizing the strong links between cultural and natural heritage and the benefits that arise from a human-centered but also from the life-centered approach. In our projects with members, we emphasize the importance of engaging in transdisciplinary education, research, and action to make the most of the potential synergies. The second point is to recognize the role of cultural organization within cities. Museums, theaters, galleries, and cultural centers create the identity and landscape of cities, enhancing the sense of place for residents and visitors alike. However, they are also places, not only places for emotions and aesthetics, but also existing infrastructures and spatial assets contributing to education, identity building, or simply offering space for climate, equity, or any other dialogues that are so much needed to bring together various stakeholders. For example, in the city of Rotterdam, the Culture Campus Project Consortium is actively working with art schools that were also mentioned in the previous session to initiate inclusive processes aligned with the values and working principles of the new European Bauhaus. The project aims to create a collaborative and innovative environment where artists, designers, and cultural actors can come together to address sustainability and ecological transformation, supporting inclusive processes in Rotterdam South. Through the Culture Campus project, the city encouraged the integration of culture and creativity into urban sustainable development by fostering interdisciplinary collaboration and exploring innovative solutions co-created locally. As ICLEI, empowered by being part of this experience and as a network and partner for political dialogues, we have a lot of hope in the European Bauhaus mission to provide a proper framework for enhancing the Green Deal with beauty and to establish a platform for creativity and innovation, circularity of ideas, but also brainstorming the growth that was also previously mentioned and rethinking the potentials of what we have and what we can do with what we have. These remarks lead me to the third point. Culture plays a crucial role in making city laboratories, testing how to maintain biodiversity by strengthening sensitivity, awareness of livability, and the carbon literacy. By promoting those sensitivity, livability, and carbon literacy, culture contributes to preserving biodiversity for future generations in cities and beyond. Cities have this capacity to make use of quintuple helix and to innovate with culture as a glue for various views and expertises. Finally, as ICLEI, we emphasize the importance of reducing pollution by safeguarding the features of historic districts, and this can be achieved through the triple transformation promoted by the European Heritage Hub, of which ICLEI is part of. Green, social, and digital transformations enhanced by culture, imagination, and hope pave the way for scenarios in which our common future is preserved thanks to beliefs, stories, values, and inspiring artworks. This regeneration for the benefit of multiple stakeholders protects us from dysfunctionality while facing crises. Speculating better places will then go beyond fictions when politics also recognize that culture is at the heart of change. We see it, we feel it, and we believe in it. And we are here as a network to inspire local governments in implementing strategies resulting from creativity and the ability to imagine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Małgorzata. Our next presenter also is joining us online, is Robalica Halep.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear. We're good.
Okay.
We cannot see you, though. Ah, there we go. Good morning. The stage is yours.
Thank you. I'm Roby Hali. I'm from the Kalanguya and Kankanaey indigenous peoples in the Philippines, and I'm here on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group for Sustainable Development. So the IPMG, in short, is a mechanism for coordination of indigenous peoples following relevant sustainable development goals processes from the national, regional to global. Now, for indigenous peoples, when we're talking about culture, most often what people see of us are our colorful attires, our songs, our dances. But beyond that, there's no recognition on our connection to our land, our connection to our forests, our connection to our waters. You take out our land, you take out our forest, you take out our coastal areas, all everything will be gone from us, even our culture. We're very much in the way we're very much interlinked, no, to our territories, which means our land and resources. Now, um, in relation to climate change, indigenous peoples who have been contributing least to climate change are bearing the brunt of the impacts of climate change. It's not only on environmental impacts, no, but um, indigenous peoples experience a lot of changes in relation to their livelihood. A lot of them are also displaced because of floods and landslides. Now, the other aspect that I'd also want to point out in this forum are the solutions that are being put forward in relation to addressing climate change. And this is a big concern for us indigenous peoples because it would have a heavy impact again to our continuity as peoples and also our culture. This commodification of forests, carbon credits, biodiversity credits is not something that we see as a way forward. What we see as a way forward is the recognition of our rights to our lands to be able to maintain and continue managing our resources, which we have been managing for centuries. The conservation efforts on conservation and protected areas that are being implemented now in line with response to climate change also is causing displacement and conflict in many indigenous territories. We see that happening now in Kenya with Ogiek indigenous peoples. And again, as I've been emphasizing earlier, no, you take us out from our territories, everything is gone from us, even our identity as indigenous peoples with a collective way of life. The other point that I'd also want to raise in this forum is this transition to fossil fuels. um, we are for the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, but these projects have to be implemented in line with our right to free, prior, and informed consent in recognition of our ownership to our land and resources. Again, these projects that are being implemented, these solar farms, wind farms that are being implemented in our territories are having adverse impacts on our livelihood and our ways of life. It's important that solutions that we put forward in relation to climate change respects and recognizes the rights of the people, including the rights of indigenous peoples as enshrined in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Now, this is not to say that indigenous peoples are not doing anything, no, to preserve our forests, to preserve our culture. In fact, in line with the transition from fossil fuels, there are a number of indigenous-led solutions that are supporting community-led renewable energy projects that supports all these far-flung off-grid indigenous peoples communities, not only to have access to energy, but to be able to have support also for their livelihood, for education, for health, and in the wider aspect, the protection of their forests and resources. There's also a lot of initiatives of indigenous peoples to enhance the management of their forests. But again, what we need from states is to recognize these efforts and to recognize our rights for us to be able to continue our collective way of life, for us to be able to continue nurturing the forest for the next generation, and for us to be able to continue our rich culture and tradition. In our region here in Southeast Asia, we are being called diverse and we are one of the most diverse peoples here. But again, it's just so limited to just our weaving patterns, our rich dances, our songs, and we are beyond that. That's one that's just one aspect of our identity as indigenous peoples. What's more important for us to be able to persist as collective peoples and to be able to pass on a better life for the next generation is that our rights are respected and recognized, not only in the discourse on climate change, but also in the discourse on the Sustainable Development Goals and on biodiversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robalita, especially for joining us from far away in a different time zone. Our next speaker is Ted Oakes.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me here. Like Will, I'm not from Dublin, but I am from Ireland, so it's very nice to be back home. I'm based in Brussels, and I work for Europa Nostra, and I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Europa Nostra, and thank you, Jordi, and the team for thinking of us. So I'm going to talk to you very briefly about the call to action, the Venice call to action, which we launched recently, and it is an initiative on behalf of our partners to address a gap between culture and climate action that we're experiencing at the moment. And through this call to action, we are hoping that we can call for the implementation of a new UN work plan on culture, heritage, and climate action. And essentially, our call to action is a request to the national governments and the member states party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to adopt a joint work decision on culture and climate at the next COP, which is happening in a few days' time. And we essentially want to start a process by where climate action will be bolstered through the harnessing of culture, and where heritage-based solutions to the climate crisis can be scaled up. We also want this to lead to the inclusion of cultural policies, culture in key policies, as well as discussions on the adaptation to the climate crisis in reaching net zero, and also recognizing as well, we want this call to recognize that in trying to address the climate crisis, yes, while on the one hand it's important to safeguard and protect cultural heritage, at the other end as well, it's also important to recognize that culture and heritage can be part of the solution. And that is something that we're trying to emphasize with this call to action. And another important element of the call to action as well too is we want to try and unite and to empower the cultural sector in general, because we want to include, and the cultural sector should be included in this decision-making process, because we are a very powerful network. We are a bit dispersed at times, but together we have an immense amount of resources at our disposal. And in that regard, I'm quite happy to say that we've managed to reach out to already quite a few international actors on this element. The call was launched a few weeks ago, and many organizations and individuals have already joined the call. They've signed it. Some of our founding signatories are here as well. Europa Nostra, my own organization, we've signed one of the founding signatories, ICOMOS, European Cultural Foundation, Culture Action Europe, and many other organizations have also joined the call as well. And for the next steps in this campaign, there will be a meeting of culture ministers at the COP next week, and this will see the launch of a group of friends of culture-based climate action for the UNFCCC. And this group is essentially an informal coalition of member states, which will be focused on strengthening the political momentum to try and ensure that culture and cultural heritage are included on the agenda and to address the impacts of climate change. And we are essentially hoping that this group will also be able to advocate for the inclusion of culture on the agenda and also push for its adoption, because at the end of the day as well at COP it will be the member states who decide. But on that, I think it's important to emphasize that while we're talking about a coalition of states, we also need a coalition of non-state actors as well, and not just the organizations I mentioned that have already signed the call, but we also need local governments, we need municipal authorities, civil society organizations, we need universities, individuals as well, artists, craftspeople. All of these people have a certain skill and expertise that when we combine, we can utilize it to help address the climate crisis. And with that in mind, that's actually very much how the call started as well, too, because the call really started only a few months ago with a coalition of partners like this. We launched the call at the first event of the European Heritage Hub, and the European Heritage Hub is a pilot project that is trying to bring together, led by a consortium of stakeholders, trying to bring together actors from cities to local governments, universities, civil society organizations, everybody who has an interest and a stake in heritage and in addressing the climate crisis. Europa Nostra is the lead in the Heritage Hub, and essentially we're trying to bring together all this expertise and we are trying to embrace what we've called the triple transformation, that is the social change, the digital change, and the green change that we're in the midst of, and try and use heritage to adapt to this. And so at Venice in September, the first public event of the European Heritage Hub, we launched the global call to action, the global call to put cultural heritage, arts, and creative sectors at the heart of climate action, as its full title is. And this coalition was instrumental in putting this together because really all these actors and activists, they know and they have experienced firsthand how heritage and how culture can be used to mitigate some of the problems that we're facing. And the next steps for this now are we're hoping that the COP will lead to a consultative process which can help try and bring arts and culture and heritage on the agenda to address the climate crisis. And we're hoping that this will be adopted in the next COP. But if it isn't adopted in the next COP, I think it's important to suggest as well that we are still pushing this as well. We are determined to bring this further, bring it to COP28 and continue to push this on the agenda. And finally, I suppose before I give the floor back to the panel, I would like to just emphasize that this really is the leading force here is my colleague, Andrew Potts, who has been a driving force on this call and on this campaign. And he will be in COP as well in the next few days to try and push this. And this is available also to all of you to sign as well, too, here and online. If you visit the Climate Heritage Network online, you will be able to join the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. And our final speaker is Wakar Afin.
Thank you so much. I'm here on the behalf of the Education and Academia Stakeholder Group. And the question that I was put forward is how education and academia kind of play the role to highlight and operationalize the connection between climate change, climate action, and culture. I mean, education plays a huge role to kind of give us alternative views. The views that are not dystopian or apocalyptic, but the views that enable us to teach better stories about the climate, better stories about the climate action that we can take, and the better stories that kind of promote an element of care that is the fundamental of education. Climate emergency cannot be dealt with only technological responses or the innovations, but the heart of it is culture, the heart of it is the education. And the part of education is not just the technologies again, or the digital transformation, the look. When we look at when we look at climate as kind of a technology, when we look at the technological response to the climate, it does not solve the problem because the problem usually arises from the attitudes, behavior, and values of, a large public. And that's why we need research and academia to not just highlight the technical sides of things, but also provide us a historical, a cultural, and a social background to where we are and where we want to be. We have come a long way in terms of education to address climate action, be it new academic programs or sustainability training or climate centers, but we need to do a lot, and education and the climate has to be the main focus of institutional strategy as well. There are a lot of examples, good examples we have in Dublin as well, be it TCU Climate and Media Program or TCD internship focused on sustainability training, or UCD design thinking regarding sustainability, but we have to do a lot. Part of education is also that the advocacy for climate action needs to be student-led. It has to be the student advocacy that has to be the center of climate action, because that provides agency and empowerment to the students and the learners to tackle climate action. Our knowledge of climate change is also, in a way, it comes from the politics of way climate knowledge is kind of translated. And that is why we need a bottom-up approach where non-Western societies, they are as engaged as some Eurocentrism views as well. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers. Is the audience ready for more questions right off the bat? I want to see some hands shoot up really fast. Excellent. Thank you to the gentleman over here.
Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. I believe that the question we are dealing with this morning is a very complex one indeed. Listening to the different speakers, I feel like we don't really understand culture the same way. And what is culture? From the UNESCO's definition, culture, in its widest meaning, is all the characteristics, whether intangible, cultural, different traits that distinguishes from others. This includes arts, literature, ways of living, fundamental rights, our values, traditions, and our beliefs. So, isn't culture both a problem and a solution to climate change? Because really, what can a human do that doesn't include culture in their behavior? So my question is for all the audience and the participants. Thank you.
Thank you. We might go to online first to Margareta and Robles, if you have an answer or a thought or reflection. I think you are on mute. We're just having a little technical difficulty on our side and I can't hear you. Just give us a second.
Maybe.
Oh,
I can try. Can you hear me perhaps?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. So we didn't hear the translation, so I suppose we didn't understand the entire message. So I'm not sure whether we are able to answer.
Maybe we'll come back then to yourselves, Wolf, the gentleman in the room.
I can have a go at that. It's such a good question, and the question of what is culture, what is heritage, is one at the core of what we kind of grapple with at ICOMOS all the time, because we're such a broad church, if you know that expression. And I think you also make a point that culture is part of the problem as well as part of the solution, both historically, the Industrial Revolution, where we are today as a result of cultural processes, and likewise we'd like to think that the future will be led by culture too. But I think the wonderful complexity of culture is also one of its great strengths, in that it is embedded in just everything we do. I mean, you gave a wonderful list, some of the definitions from UNESCO, but I don't even think that incorporates the broad range of what we're often talking about with culture. It's embedded in everything. It's wonderfully complicated and wonderfully complex. It's intersectional. It intersects with so much other things in society, and I think that's one of the reasons why if we can embrace it and embrace that multimodality of culture, we can actually have a huge effect in it, making change. But I think you're right. I think we need to start from understanding that culture is part of the problem, but also is part of the solution in the future.
Thank you.
If I may add as well, I think it's a fantastic question because it really does. Can you hear me okay?
No.
Oops. No, should I go up to the podium? Maybe it's easier. Oops.
Oh, no, we got
Is
you.
it working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What was I saying? No, I think it's a fantastic question because even when we, like Will said, when we think of the definition of culture or cultural heritage, I mean, that's cultural heritage by UNESCO, I think, is all the manifestations of human creativity that are inherited. I mean, that's absolutely enormous. But I suppose maybe when we think of the diversity of culture as well, that's probably part of the argument then for mainstreaming it into all other areas of policies as well. Like we shouldn't just have ministries of culture or ministries of heritage, but we should be trying to consider how ministries of transport can include culture and heritage in their policies, or how departments of finance can include heritage and culture in their policies as well. And I think also in terms maybe of the problems and the solutions, I mean, it's exactly right. There are problems out there. I mean, it is a reality. I mean, cultural heritage is threatened by the climate crisis. I mean, a few years ago, with the floods in Belgium, I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, a huge amount of museums in Germany and in Belgium were completely destroyed. And then you have to think of the risks that come with that as well too. Not necessarily the damage that's happening there, but also then these sites then become targets for theft as well too. There's not always enough money then as well to try and restore these sites then as well. But on the other hand then as well, heritage and culture can be part of the solution. And I'm thinking of the recent EU report, I think it was last year, and they were talking about, the name of it escapes me, but they were talking about how, traditional building practices, for instance, are heritage, So a lot of our daily lives, a lot of the things that we do are in their very nature cultural and heritage practices, and if we maybe try and think of it that way, if we try and maybe change the focus a little bit and understand that some of the actions that we're doing, some of the cultural actions that we're doing are already by their very nature sustainable. And this is something that can help us to address the problems that are out there.
Can we go online and either Robelets or Margaret? Really not doing good today on the names. So how can culture, both the good and the bad, be a response, or just reflecting on what Ted has said there? Not our facial expressions just suggest we're having a few issues there. Can I go to the lady here?
Thank you. My apologies, my questions are mostly addressed at the previous panel, but anyone up on the stage, please feel free to jump in with any questions. So it was very interesting to hear about the panoply of measures that local governments through their culture sectors are deploying, and especially in relation to what the Secretary for Culture from Bogota was presenting to us. And she alluded a little bit to this in her response about what's the good life, the bon vivir. I was curious to know what local governments, especially in the Latin American context, are doing to amplify indigenous voices in the discussions about climate change, because I think some of the strongest profound challenges to what is development and our development and ecological balance compatible are coming from indigenous voices. So what are city governments doing to bring them into the conversation, both their ways of life, their ways of thinking, and their artistic expressions is one question. And I was very happy to have an indigenous voice on this panel. The second question relates to, I think it was sorry, I've forgotten the names, the UCLG researcher who was saying there's this very positive global movement of climate change consciousness. And I agree with that, but we also have polarizing societies. And so on the other side, we have a very strong movement of climate change denialism that seems to be gaining ground. I currently live in Italy, and I'm surprised to hear that Agenda 2030 is a dirty word in conspiracy theories. And if we talk about the discursive and the prefigurative power of arts. Some of you may be familiar with the film Don't Look Up. As the impacts of climate change become more and more evident, I think we need to be prepared that there are going to be people more and more determined to put their heads in the sand. So what do local governments do about making sure that climate change discussions and the role of culture in them, it's not just people speaking to the already converted? How are we getting diverse audiences to come to the art, the artistic expressions about climate change? Those are my two questions.
They are excellent questions. I might put Robeliza on the spot to answer the question in relation to how local governments are engaging indigenous populations, because I think the lessons for South America would also apply to Asia as well. And hopefully the sound works.
Okay. Is
Yes.
it?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, in line with the question on how local governments work with indigenous peoples, again, the big challenge that we have is that indigenous peoples are being seen only as beneficiaries, and the approach to development for us is more top-down, without recognizing that we also have our own right to development, and we have our specific needs and priorities that we want to be included in the development agenda for it to be sustainable. Now, at the local level, the engagement between indigenous peoples and local authorities, I think, are much better than at the regional and at the central level. For example, in Kenya, right now, some of the Maasai indigenous peoples are engaged with their county government in contributing to the county development plan. But what we need is beyond that. We need states, we need all actors to be able to recognize and respect our rights. Because even if our needs and priorities are integrated in development plans, even if the local government is engaging us in some of their cultural programs, promoting our culture and tradition in some of their key events, on the ground, a lot of indigenous peoples are losing a lot of their identity culture because of land grabbing, because of climate change, because of all these development projects that are being imposed on us. So what we need are more strengthened policies that recognizes indigenous people's rights. What we need are more actions also from everyone to recognize our roles and contributions, and also to demand accountability to those who have been causing this climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret, I might ask you to answer the city's question, and then I might come in a little bit on how local governments are addressing, because I know ICLEI does a lot of work, and we're involved in a few projects with ICLEI, and that question of deniers, climate deniers. How is ICLEI and yourself working with cities to address that?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question, which is a highly important one. I believe our answer at the policy and at the cooperation level with the local governments is to foster bottom-up initiatives and to invest a lot in the educational dialogues, since the ability of critical thinking and reflecting is crucial to recognize what is a fake news, what is not, what is true, what is false, not to test perhaps on an individual basis, but to know already what is proved scientifically to be wrong and to share this knowledge. I have mentioned a project of a Culture Campus that is taking place in Rotterdam, and this is quite interesting one because here we have a synergy from various local organizations, public organizations that are very much involved locally in dialogues to bring together various perspectives and to operate on various levels in order to accelerate. So they are implementing digital strategies and at the same time various post-digital strategies to make quicker progress and to make sure all stakeholders are involved. And this is, in my opinion, crucial to provide skills, to provide educational offer in various formats, not only at the university level, but starting from the primary schools, to make people able to think critically and to recognize, to reflect and to recognize. And the other risk that I see indeed when we claim that culture provides us the opportunity to imagine, to reflect, the risk would be that we make culture too instrumental. And this is also something that we need to reflect with local governments together, not to expect too much from culture as the provider of the solution, but also as the sector in need. And I think this also reflects the situation of the indigenous people who are very present in the theories on how to tackle the climate change, the climate emergency as case studies. This is not about case studies. This is about real life, real needs, and the real necessity to preserve culture and values, voices, and diversity. So I would say education is the key to make us aware and to also overcome risks which are resulting from false communication, fake news, also to some extent disseminated by the artificial intelligence tools that are so present now. So I would say critical thinking is what we need to strengthen and develop together at the local level.
Thank you, Małgorzata. I think that actually makes it go over to you, Wakar. You are part of DCU, and you mentioned the School of Communications. How does, it links nicely, how does the research that's going on in DCU support local government in addressing those issues?
Yeah, so we have a climate change and media program as well, and then we have a climate change center as well that kind of focus on collecting interdisciplinary research, because at the end of the day, it's not a program-based or a module-based or upskill-based thing, climate action. It has to be the part of overall institutional strategy, that embeds in all sorts of action that an institution do. And also, communication is key for climate action. When we talk about indigenous people, I mean, the stigmatization, the way the discourse happens, that has to change, and that will change when we hear from them, basically. So I would say communication schools and communication programs have a lot to do to kind of disintegrate what's the the false notions are. So yeah, so the DC School of Communication is doing it is doing research. The programs are there. Students involved in all sorts of projects regarding sustainability and all. But the heart of it is actually empowering them regarding their future and kind of creating resources that are not just for academia, but education goes beyond academia as well. So.
Thank you. And I will say that DCC does rely heavily on our academic institutions to support us in taking that battle, because it is hard. And I can see that I have 1 minute, which means I have 1 minute to give final closing remarks, so you guys are off the spotlight here for questions and interrogations from myself. But that means we have coffee next, so you can definitely ask our speakers more questions and have that dialogue, because I think that's one word that comes to mind in this conversation is it is about dialogue, and I've just written notes here, and obviously they're terribly written, and I'm struggling to interpret them myself, but you mentioned Don't Look Up, and I think another movie that kind of came to mind as everybody was speaking is it's everything, everywhere, all at once, and culture is part of that, and we need it. We need it to build trust. We need it to build partnerships, as was highlighted, the SDG 17, this is about partnership, and you partner through culture, and that's how we combat challenges around misinformation, because I think at the end of the day, we all share the culture of home. This is our home. We have one planet. I think that the term land, I think I really appreciated, Roblica, you kind of mentioning that there's culture attached to land and that it isn't all colorful costumes and music and song. Those play a role, but that very much comes from land, and we all have an attachment to the land we live on and the place that we live, and it's important, I think, to demonstrate the point of Jeju and being able to take care of the land, even as tourists, when you're visiting a place, that showing of respect to somebody's territory, to somebody's space is important, and that can only be achieved through cultural dialogue. Please join me in thanking our speakers from both panelists, and please go enjoy the wonderful coffee and snacks, and don't do any food waste for me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have
Where are you from?
Sorry?
Where are you from?